So today I'm going to talk about two terms today. Don't mind the mess. I am sorry. I do not have a green room like YouTubers do. Anyway, um, today I'm going to talk about two terms. The two terms are going to be ideological segregation, and then the second term is going to be implicit racism. I butchered that word. I'm sorry. Excuse me. So the first word we're going to talk about, or the first term we're going to talk about, is ideological segregation. Sheesh. Um, so that one is like certain groups, race, not race groups, but certain people certain people of a race pick and choose who they want to hang out with. So Mexicans, they hang out with a group of Mexicans. They're just Mexicans. The blacks hang out with just blacks because they're blacks. These Salvadorians hang out with Salvadorians because they're Salvadorians. The whites hang out with the whites because they're whites. The Asians hang out with the Asians because they're Asians. Polynesians hang out with the Polynesians, or Samoans and Anyway, so it's just basically like, so let's say a black person comes up to the Mexican like, yo, let me kick it with you guys. You guys seem pretty cool. I like you guys' vibe. Then one Mexican's like, sure, I'm down with that. And then the other Mexican's like, no, you're not like us. You're never gonna be like us. It's not. I want to be like you. I just want to hang out with you. But then the other Mexican's like, no. Why do you want to hang out with us? No, there's no reason to hang out with us if you're not like us. So that's just the segregation part. Like, no, we're cool on this side. You were better on that side. We don't want you mixing with us. Because that just shows, like, that's what it's, like I just said, segregation. That just shows, like, you're cool. Don't worry about it. You go with your people. Not with us. Because you ain't going to roll with us like that. That's just like, it's still the segregation part right there. It's just gonna and it still happens till today. Here in El Paso, they have that. Someone who's not a Mexican, they're like gonna treat you as the oddball. Like, nah, why are we gonna kick with you? You're not like us. You don't know the struggle we have. You don't know what we grew up with. You don't know our language, this and that. All the cons, because you're not who you are. Or you're not who you are with us. Like, we don't associate with you guys. Even like that, they have that in prison where, like, they have to separate everybody of their race. If you're black, you hang out with the blacks. If you're white, you hang out with the whites. If you're Chinese, you hang out with the Chinese. If you're Mexican, you hang out with the Mexican. If you're Salvadorians, you hang out with the Salvadorians. The reason why I keep bringing up the Salvadorians part, because the Salvadorians like to exclude themselves from the Mexicans. Like in California, Salvadorians didn't like to mix with the Mexicans. They're like, no, we cool, we stay in our part. That's why we don't like them. That's why they have their own gang called MS-13, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, those people only talk to you if you're Salvadorian. If you're not Salvadorian, don't have a lick of even half, they're like, nah, why should I talk to you? There's no reason for you to breathe the same air that I'm breathing near me. So, that just shows that, like, there are still groups, certain racial groups that just don't want to break their tradition or their culture. And that's a great example of the movie is that there's that old white man. He said, like, he had two Mexican friends, right? But he only saw those two Mexican friends when school wasn't involved. Yes, they did recess or after school they hanged out. But what I'm trying to say is that the ideological segregation was a big thing in the education in the 20th century. It was a big thing. Like, at that time, the whites, the so-called top dogs were like, nah, we're gonna education. In my opinion, they try to make education just for the whites only. But yes, the brown people are involved, correct. The black people are involved, correct. But they put them in different areas, not to mix with the whites, because I guess they didn't want to poison the whites. They didn't want to mix and match. They don't want to be like, no, we're not trying to. We're trying to keep education just for our people, our whites. That's it. That just shows a great example of ideological segregation. The Mexicans will stay in the Mexican classes, and during the movie we watched, Enrique, crazy, his name's the same thing as mine. He told us that his mom would stay in first or second, third, I don't know, whatever class for like 3 years while the kids were learning, you know, and while the kids were learning, and then while his mom was still in class knowing everything, but she still had to sit there and just take it. Like, oh, well, I'm not in 12th grade, so why should I care? You know what I'm saying? But it just shows a great example. Like, they try to keep it all in one thing and like all pure. Like, no, we don't want that smart kid from the Mexicans to be with the whites because it's going to mess everything up. And, we got to keep everybody the same, so we just got to separate them, you know. Smarts doesn't come in just one color. It comes in many different colors. Another example in that movie, it also talks about like, oh my goodness, there's so much I don't remember. Excuse my gosh. It also talks about how, they met that woman at the Whataburger, and she was just saying, oh no, that was normal for this to have that. It kind of sucked, like, that happened. She had that mentality, I'm assuming she wears sunglasses to cover, her identity. But I feel like she was brainwashed in that point, like, oh, well, yeah, it sucked for them, but, we did our thing. Sucks bad for them, they didn't have that good education that they should have. But, the way, it just shows that, like, she was like, oh yeah, I felt bad, but I'm gonna keep going on while they're at this level, and they're on level 1, I'm on level 16. I'm gonna keep It's just a great example of segregation. I'm gonna keep saying it. It just shows a great example like of that. So that's one term. The next term is gonna be impractical racism. I think I messed them up, but I'm going to explain them, but they're going to connect. I'm pretty sure I messed them up, but anyways, impractical racism. So that one, it just talks about assumptions. Like, hey, Enrique, you like, that happens a lot here in El Paso. Me living here for 6 years, I don't understand Spanish. I don't speak it. I try to understand it. Anyways, I work at the gas station at Costco, and then they see my name tag, and they're like, oh, Enrique, bingo, my guy. They're from Juarez, or they're even from Texas. You're my guy. Anyway, me ayudas. And at first, I didn't know what me ayudas mean. And I was like, what does that mean? They're like, no habla español? And I'm like, no. And they look at me like, but your name's Enrique. And I'm like, yes, my name's Enrique. There's no issue here. But how is your name Enrique if you don't speak Spanish? You think you could switch your name to Henry? That'd be easier? That's just assuming. You're putting labels on something that, I go up to a Chinese person like, yo, you speak Mandarin? No, I don't speak Mandarin. Or just because I'm Asian doesn't mean I'm Chinese. I'm actually Japanese. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's what impractical racism is. You are putting a label before you even hear the book. Or it's like that thing, you judge a book by its cover. You're already judging the book by its cover. Like, oh, it's Enrique. Cool. Perfect Spanish. Hey, Enrique, you speak Spanish? No. But your name's Enrique. I know my name's Enrique. But that doesn't mean I understand Spanish. It doesn't mean I'm going to like every single food. You're going to probably hate me on this, but I don't like barbacoa because that's just not my thing. You can't just put me in a label that you think I'm in. That's what it is. And here's another great example. My boss, I ate something spicy. He's like, I thought you were Mexican. You could handle spice. You Mexicans can handle spice. Right, but doesn't mean every Mexican's going to handle spice. Mexican American now, I educate myself. Not every Mexican American is gonna like spicy food. Not every Mexican American is gonna like mariachis. Not every Mexican American is gonna, say they've been in deep Mexico, which I haven't. Only been Juarez, that's it. But that's just a label. That's just a label. Someone's judging you by the book of it, the cover of the book. Another great example. I'm gonna keep throwing examples before I tie it in with the movie. Another great example Disney. So I don't know if you know Handy Manny. Handy Manny is a great example in practical racism. The reason why I say that because he has a Hispanic accent. You know, he has a Spanish accent, right? He's good with tools. Okay, he has talking tools that have a accent too. So, and his last name is Manny, short for Emmanuel. Um, you know, Handy Manny. That it rhymes. Anyways, as a kid, you're like, cool. He's handy man. He speaks a little bit of Spanish. He's a construction worker. He knows what he's doing. But that implements to kids who are watching that at that age, like me, like, oh shoot, hey, you have that same accent as Handy Manny. You know how to fix stuff, right? Cool. Can you help me out with whatever project? Or hey, you're a hard worker, just like Handy Manny. Can you help me out? That just shows that like you're putting that in that kid's mind. You're not brainwashing. Yes, in a way you are. You're like, oh, okay, look, you know what to do. Can you help me out? Because Handy Manny's Mexican and you're Mexican. You should know how to use these tools. I'm assuming you know how to use them. You know, that's just a great example of that implement racism, impractical racism. God, I am butchering this word so much. I can't wait to get made fun of. Anyways, yeah, it's just a great example. And then even like what's another one? But that was the only example I had for that one, which is pretty good in my opinion. But what also how that ties into the movie is that which one? Come on. The lady. So the lady, the white principal, what really caught me off guard, Enrique, he's like, so, if you have a student who's from a different country, this and that, she's like, oh, all of our students are pretty good. Even if we have a kid from, I think it was the Philippines or Thailand or Vietnam, like, oh, we'll get those services for that kid because, um, English is not their first so we're going to assume they have a learning disability. The learning disability they have is just not speaking the language. If you show them the lesson plan, they might get it. Yes, they may not know English, they may not read English, but doesn't mean they're capable of understanding it better than the person who does understand English. That just shows, like, I'm assuming, she sees a Spanish speaker kid, she's going to be like, all right, we'll put them I need that class too. ESL, whatever it's called. So it's just like, she's trying to put this, front saying like, oh no, all of our students are good, and then when Enrique said something, she just paused like, this and, she tried to like put her bandage to cover her, like, look, I'm not a racist. I could do all this. We're just a good, we're a good, just cut the BS. You know what you're doing. You just got caught in the wall. Enrique's asking you these questions, and you were like, ugh. That just shows that, like, that implement racism. What are you doing, cat? No, stop. You're interfering me. Anyways, what was that? Anyways, sorry if my cat meows. He's curious. Anyways, so, that just shows a great thing. Like, even in school, there's a lot of kids who spoke Spanish as a first language. They've been put in special classes like me, but they're really smart. And there's this girl, I think, named Sarai Reyes. Yes, she spoke Spanish as a first language. She did all the testing, this and that. And I'm like, wow, she's pretty smart. Well, who said she wasn't smart? She just didn't know how to speak English. Once she got English down, she's a smart woman throughout middle school and high school. They just put these borders on these kids who don't know how to speak a certain language, don't know how to speak English. So like, hey, let's just put these borders in front of them and make them quit and make them graduate with the bare minimum, so we can help less of the student, or, that's just a great example of, like, impractical racism. It's just like, we're assuming the worst because we know what's going to happen in the end. Well, you assume the worst, correct, but at the end, there's going to be different results. You know, not everything's gonna go bad. Like I said, you can't judge a book by its cover. Sometimes you gotta turn around and look at the back of the cover and read what their actual intentions is. You know, it's it sucks, but these two terms are gonna stick with me for a while. I appreciate it, but I'll wrap it up. To wrap it up with this video, that these two terms go hand in hand together. One is part of the equation, the other is part of the. It's like they're both part of the same equation, but different forms. They're gonna have the same answer, but different equation. They tie in together because because both of them have labels, and people put labels on those people with these terms. No, he speaks Spanish. We gotta put him in these classes. No, I don't like you because you're black. You know, it's just like, no, it's just, you gotta learn how to like overcome that, you know. It's one of them. Oh god, I'm butchering this. But yes, they're the same. They're the same thing, honestly. Racism and segregation go hand in hand pretty well, because once that person's been segregated so long, you know, later on in the future, there's gonna be tradition like, no, you cannot hang out with that white boy because they don't do well with us. No, you can't hang out with that brown boy because he's gonna cause trouble. Because remember, back in my day, we were segregated for those reasons. You know, it just goes hand in hand. You know, it's just like, oh crap, they are similar. It's just one sounds worse than the other, or that one sounds worse than the other. So like the more you explain it, the better understanding you have of it. You're like, oh, they're the same, but seen differently. Well, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I tried my best.